We've talked a little bit about sort of the how, if you will, and the why for the why and the what for IPD. But what I really want to do now is try to focus in on what you have to do if you're starting to think about doing an IPD agreement. What are the key factors that you want to focus on? Because one of the things we found is we've done this, and we've done this for extremely large projects, and we've done this for smaller projects, is that very often at the inception, the people are arguing about the wrong things. And I don't mind in a negotiation people sort of arguing strongly for their position, but oftentimes we find they're even arguing for things that are against their self-interest. They don't even quite understand enough about the agreement. So one of the things we've tried to do, and one of the reasons the paper was written, was to try to get people on the same page as to what it is that you need to know in order to even understand an IPD agreement from your interest. And that's a process that we really kind of talk about as unlearning to negotiate. There's a mind shift. Traditionally, we talk about contracts as being prescriptive. In fact, if you look at a traditional construction contract, one of the things that we're struck by is it does not spend a lot of time telling you how to achieve anything. It tells you there's a lot in there about what can happen to you if things go wrong. And a lot of the effort put into the basic agreement is focused essentially on what could go wrong and who's responsible if it does. That's a prescriptive agreement. IPD is flexible. It's trying to tell you, in fact, who has the authority to do certain things in order to make the project go forward. It's more like, in fact, you should more think of it as a constitution. A contract is, I'll deliver 500 screws on Tuesday. You know if the screws don't meet the standard, you know if they were delivered on Wednesday. Very prescriptive, very cut and dried. A constitution, on the other hand, tells you how to do things. The United States Constitution, which you can stop and think, has only had 27 change orders in its life, which is not too bad, doesn't tell a senator what to vote. It tells a senator it can vote, or he or she can vote. And that's different. That's a different approach than the way you look at the contracts. Lisa talked about GMP fixed as a traditional way. Guaranteed maximum price really sounds good if you're an owner, except that GMP also means got my piece. Because what we've learned is in the GMP contracts, is a GMP contract creates a conflict of interest almost instantly. So does a lump sum. You stop and think about it if you're a contractor. Something goes wrong on day one. You have no idea yet whether you're going to be above the GMP or below. That's to be found out in the future. So you have to protect your position because there are notice provisions written in that contract which says you must. Therefore, you have to issue a notice of claim on the first date, not even knowing if you'll ever need it, which you then get a response from the owner or the architect saying you're dead wrong, and you've immediately started a fight on day one. Generally, we've learned, I've done construction litigation since 1979, and most of my construction litigation, in fact, the great bulk of my construction litigation is under lump sum and GMP contracts. How can that be? Delay and impact claims under GMP contracts. I thought it was guaranteed. There's really no guarantee under a GMP contract. That's why we've moved to target cost. We look at a way to basically reduce risk, reduce fear, increase creativity, and focus on the outcome we want to get. There's a big focus on where are our contingencies in fixed agreements. You have to think not so much about contingencies, but how do you adjust targets? A much more important issue in an IPD agreement. Traditional contracts spoke on liability transfer. Who do I push the liability to if something goes wrong? IPD has liability waivers. Those issues don't even come up. First step you have to look at, and this is, as they say, this is one of those slides you have to say, yes, it's all on the exam. Now, the point is that every project is different, what I call the project dimensions. And I'll just do a few of them, but you have to understand the project dimensions before you begin to negotiate. If you don't, you'll be negotiating the wrong things. We've talked about IPD as a way to reduce costs. We've talked about IPD for sustainability. Let's talk a little bit about deep goals from an owner's perspective. And just contrast two situations. If you're a speculative developer, you want to get to market soon at the lowest possible price for roughly the scope you were talking about. If, on the other hand, you are a nonprofit that's going to own an institution, or let's say you're a university, you have a budget of $150 million to do a project. If I can deliver it to you for $135 million, you don't want to take that $15 million and put it in your pocket. You want $15 million more building. You want more value for your money. You don't necessarily want to spend less than your budget. It's a very different mindset. And you change the way you look at the contract depending on how you do that. Others, if you're Intel, maybe getting that facility open in time is more important than any other single goal, because that allows you to deliver a chip at a certain time. Or maybe the Apple tablet if it comes out tomorrow. Similarly, cost and duration really affect things. If you have a project that can be done, as the Autodesk projects were done, in less than a year, you can deal with cash flow a certain way because people can live with that. If you have a project that's of 7 years duration and you're going to park profit at risk, you have to think about how you deal with cash flow. Not all firms. Bechtel, one of the major EPC contractors, could perhaps sit with 7 years of zero profit on a project. Most contractors, most designers can't. And so you have to figure out how you're going to put that in. So the first step is to take a deep look at what you're really trying to achieve and what are the real interests of the parties. And you want to identify everyone's deep goals. And one of the basic rule is that if you're trying to pick an agreement, you want to find the intersection of people's interests. A lot of people try to drive deals, in fact, that they don't have an intersecting interest. Those are guaranteed failures. You find the intersection, and that's where what we refer to as the deal. The deal lives in the intersection, which is another thing. Throughout my entire legal career, when I get involved with dealing with contracts, I have clients who send me a complete contract, whether it's an AIA document or a custom document, that say, can you review this? What do we need to modify? And to some degree, the war has already been lost. Because the question is, are the deal points right? If the deal points are right, you can create a contract which matches those deal points. If deal points are wrong, it's bad. And what I find is that people get the contract and start focusing on, can I change 3 words in the indemnity clause? That may be important at some point in time, but it's distracting from the deal. So we actually like to try to use basically a summary sheet. Whether you call it a cliff notes, a cheat sheet, a memorandum, something which basically lays down what are the basic things the parties agree to, the deal point summary. The other thing we found, and this is very interesting, this came out of one of our first IPD projects, that we had actually teams, 5 different teams competing on. And I represented the owner in that particular instance. And team 1 came in, and we gave them the contract. They looked at it, they said, IPD sounds like a great thing. By the way, we have some changes we want to make. And we started asking questions, and we'd ask a question of the architect, and the architect would kind of look at the contractor, and the contractor would look at the architect, and they couldn't figure out who was going to answer the question. And it became very clear that they could not work together, nor were they willing to actually assume some of the risks that you have to in order to achieve better performance. And we went to Team 2. Team 2, by the way, was spectacular. And we were really, really pleased with the way that project finally came out. But what we learned is that negotiation is the first collaborative act. If they can't negotiate well together, if they can't negotiate with you, if they can't look at the project as a goal, then in fact, we're probably not going there because we already don't have problems. So the way we approach things now, and actually there's a large project we're doing back on the East Coast that's basically following this approach. And we do IPD projects sort of right now, sort of all over the place, is because not everyone really has the same base that they're coming from. We often like to have a pre-negotiation workshop. It's something like this presentation here. Usually it's more focused on the specific project, but to make sure people have the same understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish.